2 weeks ago on this podcast, I talked to Devin about her great quests and all her side quests and how she wasn't sure how to start that big main quest. What did it mean to settle down, to buy concert tickets, to find a partner, to find a house, to plan for retirement? This week, we continue that conversation. My guest this week is wondering how to settle down, how to start raising children, and some of the fears that she has around those topics. I'm really excited to continue this conversation because I feel it is really appropriate for the times we're living in. I'm Mauricio Bruce, and this is The Real Question. Hi, Anna.
Hi, Mauricio.
So nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks.
I'm very excited to have you on the show. We've been starting the show by asking our guests, maybe you've heard, if there is one thing you could tell me about yourself, what would it be?
Well, I currently live in the state where I grew up in Colorado, but I spent about 10 years living in other places, which really shaped who I am. So I spent 4 years living in the Middle East and a year in Greece, and then 4 years in New York. And all of those experiences really shaped the person I came back to my hometown as. And it's something I wish the people around me just could know by looking at me sometimes.
That is fascinating. I know that's not what we're talking about today, but I'm really curious. What was your favorite place to live in?
Athens, Greece, for sure. I loved living in Greece. The food, the hospitality, the weather, everything. I miss it so much.
Wow. And I also think, I've never been to Greece myself, but I think it's probably like a land that is so packed with myth and legend and history, and it must make it very magical.
Yeah. People there will always tell you more stories. You think you know something. They always know a lot more. So there's so much to learn, which I loved too.
I love that. So I'm really curious. You're on the show. What's the question that you're bringing for us today?
So my question has to do with kids and partnership. I know that I want kids or to have a hand in raising kids in some way, but I've never dreamed of having a life partner. And now that I'm getting a little older to the point where I have to start making some practical choices towards having children, I'm struggling to imagine having them without a teammate. But the idea of a lifelong partnership feels very scary. And so I'm struggling with trying to separate out fear from expectations, from actual desire, and land somewhere on the partnership question before I take more steps down the roads towards the kids question.
Beautiful. So that's a multi-layered and complex question that we're going to sort of tackle one piece at a time. Just for the show, I'm wondering, what's your should I question?
Should I seek out a long-term partner to have kids with?
Okay. So let's take this one step at a time, Anna. You say you have a desire, and you use the words, I would like to have a hand in raising children. So I just want to clarify, do you want to be an aunt who sees children very often? Do you want to have your own children, be a biological mother? Do you want to be a part of an orphanage where you help raise kids? When you say you want to have a hand in raising children, what exactly do you imagine?
I'm an aunt now, and I love it, but it's not close enough to parenthood for me. I'm not so committed to the idea of biological children. That's one path, but I could also see fostering children or being in some kind of non-traditional family structure. I feel that a lot of my community often daydreams about these non-traditional structures, but I don't see anyone around me actually doing it. And my worry with pursuing that path or pursuing the foster kid path is that it won't feel like parenthood in the long term, but it doesn't have to be biological children for me.
But this word parenthood seems to be important.
Yeah, I think it is for me.
You also just said something. A lot of people in my community talk about these non-traditional families. And can I ask what your community is?
I have been exploring polyamory for about 7 or 8 years now. So it's partly a polyamorous community, partly a queer community. And I think a lot of us have had daydreams about homesteading in the country or doing things like that. But it seems that no one I know has left the stage of daydreams to actually try these things. And I'm afraid that if that's my plan, I won't have anybody actually commit to joining me in that plan.
Yeah. So in this queer community, in this polyamorous community, do other people have children?
No. The only people I know with children have really traditional nuclear family
Yeah.
marriage, straight marriage type of relationships, which has just never been a thing that's pulled me. But I also think that there's some fear there for me. And so I don't want to stop myself from pursuing a path that could work if I'm just afraid.
Yeah. So let's talk about that fear. You mentioned it when you introduced your question. You said, is it fear? Is it societal expectation? Or what part of this is desire? And let's just ask, what are you afraid of? You could say, I'm afraid that fill in the blank.
I'm afraid that a lifelong or long term committed partnership feels like entrapment. And I know that's a really strong word, but when I look around at the relationships around me, the marriages that I know, I wouldn't want to be in any of them. And it's not that they're unhappy themselves, but I don't know. I just don't, I have never really wanted that. And I have been in a really exploratory phase of my life for the last 10 years and have treated relationships in a really experimental way.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like that might have to end. And I guess some past experiences have made me feel trapped. And so it's not something I've sought out anymore.
I'm really curious about the word entrapment, trapped. I don't want to feel trapped. There's a real longing for freedom here, right? Like the freedom to do what I want to do and to be who I want to be. And if I sort of commit to someone else, then I am committed to their comfort or their boundaries.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
It's no longer just about me, it's about them also.
I think when you put it that way, it sounds really individualistic. And it's not that I'm the kind of person who doesn't care about other people's needs. It's almost that I put mine to the side too quickly when I'm in a relationship, and I'm afraid of doing that.
So, can you give me an example, Anna, of the way you give up your boundaries when you go into a relationship?
Yeah. Like one example might be I've been in a relationship with men in the past, and it makes them really uncomfortable when I make new male friends and hang out with those male friends. And as much as I know that what I'm doing is completely fine to pursue new friendships, if my partner expresses that that makes them really uncomfortable, or if I even anticipate that it would make them uncomfortable, I opt not to develop that friendship. And I almost unconsciously self censor my own feelings and my own needs because I don't want to start a fight or make things difficult. And I know that's me giving up my power and freedom before anyone's even asked me to. But that's been my experience in relationships. And it feels easier to just do that than to fight for something at times.
Yeah. So, you're describing a situation where when your partner becomes uncomfortable or shows discomfort because of things that are happening in your life, and you just said it, right? Before they even ask me to give these things up or they even set limits, I set them on myself because I'd rather not have the conversation or not have to have that fight. I'd rather just sort of be in peace and in quiet and in comfort. But you're not
Yeah.
in peace and quiet and comfort, at least not inside.
Right. Yeah. And I think I don't know how to approach those conversations because if somebody's telling me I'm wrong, I assume they're right. And
Ah,
sometimes it's hard to know when standing up for what I want is worth the fight or if it's the right thing to be doing or if the right thing is always to make the other person feel okay. I know it's not, but it's hard for me to discern when to make the other person uncomfortable. And so I avoid those situations.
let's change that phrase. Instead of when to make the other person uncomfortable, how would you phrase it about yourself rather than about the other person?
I don't know when to insist on what I want and what I feel versus when it's the right thing to compromise or temper myself.
Yeah. I'm just curious how, when you have children and you feel like you can't be as free as you like to be, how that's going to start affecting the relationship
The relationship with my kid.
and with yourself. If it's so easy for you to give up your limits and tell the other person, yes, you're right, I'm sorry, how is it going to be when, I don't know, I'm just going to make up something because I don't know this about you, but your child says, I want to stop moving so much. Can we just live in the same town for a couple of years?
When I'm being an adult to a child, it feels a lot easier for me to help them feel heard and also stay in my own power, not power over, but power within myself.
Yes.
And so, in a situation with a child, I feel really comfortable having those hard conversations. And I think I've practiced that a lot as a nanny, as a teacher, as an aunt. And I don't know why it's so comfortable for me to do with children, but so
Mm-hmm.
hard to do with adults.
Yeah. Yeah, you said a really key phrase there, which is stay in my own power. I can stay in my own power when I'm with kids. It's hard to stay in my own power when I'm with adults.
Yeah.
So suddenly this conversation has shifted into being a conversation about how do I hold my power? How do I hold myself when I'm having conversations with potential partners, community members, family members, with other adults?
I think that's it. I think that's one of the big fears behind partnership is that I would just give that up and then feel stuck or subjugated.
Yeah.
Yeah, one example, I don't know if this anecdote is that relevant, but for example, a couple of weeks ago, my boss was really sharp with me, which is not at all the culture of our workplace. And I don't think it was really warranted in hindsight. But at the time, I immediately assumed I had done the wrong thing. I apologized a lot of times. And it took him apologizing to me 3 or 4 times before it even occurred to me that he was in the wrong and I wasn't in that situation.
Yeah.
I just default to if someone's upset, it's my fault and I must fix it.
Okay. I want to talk about this, but I also want to make it super clear. I want to work on this power with you so that you can hold your power regardless of the situation. I'm not saying through this conversation that you have to have a partnership to be able to have a child.
I hear that. Yeah, I think that it's helpful still because I don't know how much of not wanting a partner is this issue in particular. And I think if I work through
Sure.
this issue, I'll have more clarity on maybe I would want a partner if I solve this, or maybe I still don't, but at least the question's answered that it's not coming from a fearful place.
That's right. That's right. But regardless of which way you decide to raise a child, and I like this idea, you said, I want to have my hands in raising children. This idea that I can't hold my power when somebody else says something about me, that your boss can say, hey, and you go, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And you feel the guilt that you didn't do right. Or your partner could say, I don't like you having men friends. And you go, oh my God, you're right. And you give up your men friends. That's the
Yeah.
part I want to talk about.
Yeah. That sounds really productive.
So let's start here. Do you remember, because this situation was so fresh, the one with your boss, do you remember when this thing happened? Can you walk me through what was your body doing and what was your mind doing?
Yeah. We were on Zoom and I was immediately fighting back tears. I didn't expect that the conversation would turn sharp at all because like I said, it's not our culture in our workplace. So I'd been feeling safe. And then suddenly I was so taken off guard. My hands got sweaty. It was all I could do to like choke out the last few sentences of the conversation before we hung up. And then I immediately burst into tears. And he apologized later that day and the next day and the next week. And it wasn't until the third time where it even crossed my mind that he had been more in the wrong than I was.
So your body, tears, sweaty hands, fighting back tears, choking. And your mind, what was your mind saying that whole time?
I think it was just get off the phone or get him to stop. We're like the two. It was like that freeze, that fight, flight, freeze. Yeah, I think when people are upset with me, I jump there really quickly.
Do you remember once you hung up and you were crying, like, what were your thoughts about yourself? How did you fail your boss? Do you remember? Or were you fighting like, I didn't do anything wrong? That guy's wrong.
No, there was no fight in me at all. It was,
Yeah.
I wish there had been. It was just a difference of opinion over something that was really innocent. And I still felt so guilty. I hadn't intended to even cause friction, let alone a fight. And it was a lot of guilt. I just felt so guilty that I had pushed him, you know.
So the word guilt, it's come up 3 or 4 times in just the last sentence. I felt so guilty. I felt so guilty. I felt so guilty. Can you tell me what you were guilty of in your mind?
Like not having accepted his opinion the first time he said it because I didn't realize that it mattered so much to him that mine was different. And in hindsight, now that I'm saying it out loud, that's not a reason to feel guilty having a different opinion from somebody. Yeah, but I think it was that and not realizing that he was starting to get angry. Like I'm usually really good at sensing that. And so I felt like I'd failed at that.
So you're right. In hindsight, you can go and say, "Oh my gosh, that was so silly." That doesn't matter. First of all, you're allowed to feel whatever it is that you felt, and you pushed him. Your opinion was different, and suddenly he's pushing back, and you want to fly as far away as possible and not have to deal with the reaction. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have agreed with him off the bat if I had known it mattered so much, which is probably not the right thing to do either, but that's my instinct.
And so what's interesting here, Anna, and I just want to point it out, and you just said it. If I knew it mattered so much to him, if I knew it was so important to him, I would just totally give him everything. He can say whatever he wants. It doesn't matter. My voice, my opinion. It's just, I don't want the conflict.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you remember, like, is this something that not only in the last 10 years, but in the last 30 years, is this something that is common for Anna?
Yeah, I think it's totally I see how it's how I grew up. Grew up Catholic for one thing, which is shorthand for a lot of guilt. But I think my dad had a more of an old school parenting style and a short temper, which in hindsight, his stress level had everything to do with his job and very little to do with us. But
Mm-hmm.
when things got really nasty, my mom would say, "Oh, well, it's because you pushed him in this way and because you said this and because you said this." And it was never, he shouldn't have exploded at you, you know? And it felt so unpredictable, which was the hard thing. That's how I got really good at detecting those little seismic shifts before even he knew that he was getting upset in the past. And my family's come a long way towards healing from that time, but it got so ingrained into me that other people's reactions are my responsibility.
Other people's not only reactions, but other people's upsetness, other people's just unhappiness.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what my mom modeled was it's our job to tiptoe because he's so stressed. And it came from a place of love, but it also sowed those seeds of, ooh, marriage doesn't sound that fun.
I have to tiptoe the whole time.
Right, right, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah. So we can see that and we know it's there and we know where you learned it. And that's helpful. And you still feel it.
yeah, yeah. And I've been doing these experimental relationships to try to unlearn it and see what else is possible. And I think that's what polyamory has given me. And that's what being in queer community has given me is that there's so many models of relationship besides that. And I don't know if I'll always be polyamorous or not. That's not really a stressful question for me, but to have a real relationship where I'm not trying to play that role of the good daughter, that's a skill that I need to have, whether or not I have kids or whether or not I'm polyamorous or whether or not I'm queer. I think it's been easier with poly queer people because they've also done some more work on deconstructing the way they were raised. But I don't think that I should just wait to find somebody who's such a gentle communicator that this doesn't become an issue. I think it is something I need to build in myself.
Especially, Anna, in the world that we're growing up in right now, where so many bullies are wanting to tell you how to be and what to do and how to think, that being able to hold my space and say, oh, thank you so much. That's a beautiful idea. Here's mine. Without feeling like I'm going to make them upset. I need to sort of appease them. I think what you're bringing is so important for you, but also for the whole world right now.
Mm.
Let me ask you this. How do you think, Anna, that you decide who's worth more and who's worth less? Who do I tiptoe around and who do I then hold my power with?
Hmm. I've never framed it as a question of value before, but that's interesting. I think authority tends to be a marker for me. So a boss or an older person or something like that. Authority, and then I guess people who claim power for themselves, I defer to it.
What you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, someone who has more power, more authority, like a boss, like external authority, a boss, an older person, is worth more or is more valuable than me.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never articulated it in that way, but I think yes.
I just want to confirm. You are confirming they are more valuable than me.
I mean, I know that they're not, but that's what I feel,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. That's the learned thing that's in your brain that you learned so many years ago. They're more valuable, and therefore I must defer to them.
Yeah, and the way that I've found my own value or my own power has been to give myself a lot of space. Like I love living alone and having these loosely attached relationships because my solution hasn't been stepping into my own power in those contexts, but avoiding those contexts whenever
Yeah.
possible.
I don't want you to think that has just been a waste or an avoidance or something like that. You've been exploring ways to come in contact with your power in those spaces, and you've been growing your power in those spaces. But when you come back to those old familiar spaces, you find that you still can't hold your power there.
Right. It doesn't even occur to me. Yeah,
Yeah, it's about bringing what you found over there over here. Does that make sense?
it does. Yeah, that resonates.
When we start to remember or realize or understand or learn that there is not a person that is worth more or that is more valuable, that we are all the same because we're all just humans, then we can start to sort of stand equally and hold our power equally rather than sort of bowing our heads or deferring that power to someone else. Let me ask you this. When you are in your comfort zone, where you feel you can hold your power, what does your body look like?
Hmm. It's taller, it's relaxed, it's definitely more joyful. And I think that I can regard other people with more compassion and amusement
Hmm.
versus that monitoring that I do around on people I'm scared of.
Yeah. So we need to grow that body in this space, which is a process, right? If you think about the body, the way we grow a body is by repeating and repeating and repeating, right? I go to the gym and lift the same weight 15 times, or I practice a choreography 20 times, and the body needs repetition. So if you can find that body that you say, oh, it's taller and it's more joyful, and you start to practice it in everyday spaces. I don't know, go to your coffee shop and ask for coffee from that body. Go grocery shopping in that body and slowly start to bring that body into everyday life. Then maybe the next time you're sitting in front of your boss, you can be in that body. And when he says, "Oh, we disagree," you can hold that body instead of sort of falling.
Yeah, I think the holding it's the hard part. I think that I've done a lot of work on integrating that into my daily life and bringing it to the coffee shop and bringing it to work. And my workplace generally is so positive and so supportive. And so it's been great for me to practice being the big me at work. But when I've upset somebody or when they've told me I've upset
Yep.
them, it
Yep.
collapses really quickly.
Yeah, because that's the second place. That's the place that goes back to that learning that is still ingrained in there and says, no, tiptoe. It's going to be your fault. But we can build that body, then we can fill it with emotions like confidence, like power, like value, remembering how valuable you are, remembering those 10 years abroad and everything that you learned. You traveled the world. You have things that other people in Colorado have never seen or thought or heard or tasted. And that all adds to the beauty, the complexity, and the power of who Anna is.
Yeah. I wonder what my response should have been on that phone call.
I'm not even going to go there because should have. What would be the response now? Like if the phone call was there and I'm going to tell you, sit up in your straight, tall, joyful body. And let's say the boss says, oh, I don't like your opinion. What would that joyful, confident, powerful Anna respond?
Maybe just something that isn't argumentative, but isn't collapsed either. Like, oh, I get it. Thanks. Something like that. And even if his tone was sharp, being able to respond with that, all right, got it. Rather than, I'm so sorry, it's all my fault.
Yeah. Or even if we played and you're the boss and you say, I don't like your opinion, I could say, I appreciate that, but there's no need for you to yell.
Whew.
We can talk about this. We're adults.
Yeah, it sounds good when you say it.
So, Anna, I want to take us back to the very beginning, to the very first question, which was about should I find a partner to have a child with? And I just want us, with what we've uncovered or with what we've touched, to go back and think about that question just in your body. We don't need to have an absolute answer now, but when you think about it from the conversation we've had, what does your body feel like? What does your mind say?
It feels like that's a question I should ask myself later. That's not a question I can answer until I'm able to use those skills of showing up as myself less apologetically in relationships in general. Once I feel comfortable doing that, I'll be able to answer that question from a more centered place instead of all these worries that I'm going to always upset this person, and then our friction's going to mean that I'm trapped, and then I'll be engulfed by their control, all of those fears. So I think that the answer to the question is there's some work I have to do first before I can answer that question.
Yeah, I like that very much. And if I can give you something to take from our conversation, take everything you've learned in the queer community, everything you've learned about yourself, I mean. Take that tall, joyful, compassionate Anna and start to practice her in the rest of your spaces. She doesn't have to exist only in that space.
Yeah, that'll be the practice. I'm excited.
Thank you very much for this conversation. And I think this is a real conversation that a lot of people are going to want to listen and pay attention to.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought we'd be talking about parenthood and anticipated challenges there, but there's a lot of layers. And I think this is a really important layer that'll help me answer those questions, those other questions later.
And when you're ready to talk about parenthood, you can come back.
Okay, deal.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah, thank you too.
This has been The Real Question. Our show is funded through our Patreon at patreon.com/realquestionpod. If you're a regular listener, we would love your support. Go to patreon.com and come look at all the perks. I just recorded a perk with Anna where she gives listeners the best advice she's ever received. And it's pretty great advice. Another way you can support the show is by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Reviews are really important. Please leave us a review. I love reading them. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Real Question Pod. And we are always looking for more guests, so go to our website, realquestionpod.com, and submit. I would love to have a conversation with you. We love to shout out our BFF tier patrons, Renee Underhill, Becky Boo, Jenny Cruz, and Amanda Schramm. Yay, thank you. We are a Not Sorry production. Our executive producer is Vanessa Zoltan. We are edited and produced by Ariana Nettleman. Music is by Nick Bowl, and we are distributed by Acast. Support for this show comes from the Fetzer Institute. Thank you, Anna, for joining us today. Thank you for bringing this really important conversation and reminding us how to connect to our true personal power. And thank you always to our wonderful team, Julia Argy, Nikki Zoltan, AJ Yaramas, Anissa Ahmed, Danny Langley, Courtney Brown, Casper Turkile, and Stephanie Paulsell. Join us next week for another guest, another question, and another really important conversation. See you then.